can you talk about chronic lateral shift, your take, management, and prognosis? Toughest group for me. This is a tough one because a lot of times people who've had a chronic lateral shift usually have some type of issue either at the disc or the nerve root. For those of you who don't know what a lateral shift is, that would be where you have someone who translates their top half to one side and their bottom half to the other. And usually that's a compensatory mechanism to help offload an issue either at the disc or the nerve root. That's what a lateral shift is. You a lot of times see that in radiculopathies where you have symptoms going all the way down the leg, and it's actually a offloading strategy that your body uses to protect the area. In acute situations, if you got someone with a hot disc or a hot nerve root and they have symptoms, you may not want to correct the lateral shift because that is likely there to allow the area to heal and not get stressed and strained. It may be that if you correct the shift to normal, there's going to be increased compressive forces on the nerve root, problems ensue. So be careful with that. Wait until the inflammatory process has calmed down a bit first. And the inflammatory process usually lasts anywhere from 3 days up to 14. Well, it's usually 3 to 7, but I would give someone 2 weeks personally. And that actually may involve utilizing some more aggressive measures in the short term, and that could be referring someone to get some anti-inflammatories and steroids to help calm the inflammation. If the nerve gets too compromised in this situation, so you're not getting any changes in pain, anything like that, then you have to be careful because what can happen is you could potentially have longer lasting nerve damage. That's why if you have someone with this, you need to check reflexes, you need to check sensation, you need to check muscular weakness. If any of that's happening and it's getting worse, sometimes a steroid is the fix. So give them some high dose anti-inflammatories, refer them to someone who knows how to implement that stuff. That's the first thing. But let's say we're past that. The tissues have healed, so to speak, and now we have a situation where we have someone who has this chronic lateral shift and we need to unshift them. I want you to think about what's going on here from a stacking perspective. Let's say that my lateral shift is, in my case, to the left. So my top half is going left. What's happening is the left rib cage is actually flaring outward. It's almost like a side bend towards, but a translation away. So I have the rib cage essentially doing this downward tip on the right and this upward tip on the left, and then shoving to the left the whole way. And then what I have on the hips is I have an oblique movement of the hips. In this case, the left innominate is going to be a little bit higher and the right innominate is a little bit lower. And that's the offloading strategy that your body uses when you have this type of lateral shift. Therefore, if we got someone who has a chronic lateral shift, we need to basically flip-flop that relationship. I need to do things to change the obliquity of the pelvis or be able to get that person to go oblique the other way. And I have to drop the lower rib cage on the left-hand side. Your first line of defense, broken record party people, is to stack. And you might do something unilaterally to achieve that stack. If you got someone who, even though it's a chronic condition and they still have some symptoms or they can't move well or they're very sensitive, putting them in a left side lying position if it was a left shift, perhaps with something underneath the left abs to encourage the dropping of the rib cage or the compression of the lateral lower rib cage, that actually might be a great way to start this process. And you can just have them breathing in that position. The nice thing too is, because remember the shift, I'm shifting away from the issue, is when I compress that left side, I'm going to get expansion on the right side. So that can actually help offload the structures if they're still a little bit sensitive. Perhaps you have some spinal sensitization going on. And I'll link, if you don't know what that is, I got a great course notes that talks about that. Once you have that, then and you've done, I would do that first. Then, just like with the lordosis question that we had before, I would work on getting them a squat, because that's going to create offloading throughout the entire posterior spine. That's going to be key for someone who has any nerve root issues, because it's going to increase the foraminal space. Because if I go into flexion, these zygapophyseal joints, or the facet joints, are going to be opened up. So if you can get someone to squat way low, that's going to open up that area, and that may offload some of the structures that are sensitized. If you can get someone to squat parallel or slightly below that, that's when I feel comfortable teaching someone to get their shift together, because that's what you're going to need in this next piece. You're going to need oblique shifting. Pat Davidson's got a great analogy of calling this like a seesaw pelvis. So I want someone to be able to reach one leg down and the other leg up. So for this person, if I'm shifted to the left and I have a right oblique angle at the pelvis, like this, well, now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go the opposite way with that. So what that might entail is doing lateral squats as a terminal exercise, but I also have like a table side stride that I really like, that I'll link in the show notes, that works on creating that same seesaw pelvis position. I would do this on both sides for people, just because one side is going to teach them to offload safely. The other side is going to teach them to load that area effectively. So I would start with that, work to lateral squats, work to lateral lunges while keeping the stack position. And if you can do that, a lot of times that will help restore the lateral shift that you may see. And it should reduce symptoms. With any chronic or persistent condition, make sure that you go slow through this process, because if there was some tissue injury that happened, that area is likely going to be very sensitive. So you want to make sure that you slow cook the brisket, as I like to say. Otherwise, you're going to burn the meat and need a new slab. You want to start with side lying, work towards basic stacking in the squat position to really offload the area bilaterally, then teach side shifting to restore the obliquity movement options that should be available at the pelvis. And a lot of times if you do that, that should help improve this type of person. If you've done that and there's still some sensitivity or some symptoms, that's when I would probably go towards neurodynamics. Great resources for that would be David Butler at the Noy Group. I like Shacklock a lot as well. His book is outstanding for restoring neurodynamics, or the movement of the nerve. I usually only go after that after I have restored movement options, though, because you got to think about this. If I want to do a glide of the sciatic nerve, that's going to involve some degree of hip flexion, some degree of rounding through the spine, and dorsiflexion, plantar flexion. What if you're restricted in those movements? The excursion of the nerve is going to be limited. So maximize the potential excursion first by restoring movement options, then teach the sliding and gliding of the nerve that should happen. Some of my go-to moves are a slump slider. Those are great. Doing a straight leg raise slider, or a simple thing that I like, and I think I talked about this a while back, but if you find a position that's uncomfortable, have them slouch in that position and then just move the head up and down. That's also going to create neural movement, and it should allow them, I think it works more effectively than just your traditional slide as intentionist that you might program, because it's context dependent to when that person feels symptoms. And that would be the sequence that I would utilize if I got someone with a radiculopathy or a lateral shift that cannot get back to normal. Amazing question, Alex.